Rugby is on the precipice as it battles the wildfires of dwindling playing numbers, a shrinking global audience, and financial restraints. But ironically, it seems the biggest threat to its future may come from within. In August, 185 former players launched legal proceedings against World Rugby, the RFU, SRU, and the WRU for negligence, claiming that playing the sport has caused them brain damage. Health conditions among the group of claimants range from motor neuron disease, Parkinson's, as well as those such as former Wales captain Ryan Jones and World Cup winner Steve Thompson, who is suffering with early onset dementia. The lawsuit started initially with 9 ex-professionals in 2020, but 2 years later, and with neither side able to have agreed on a settlement, it's now grown to a reported 200 players and is set to become the biggest class action in history outside of the United States. In this video, we will look at how this problem's come about, what has been done to resolve it, and most importantly, what impact the legal proceedings may have on the future of the sport. Well, rugby's always had a problem with concussions. In fact, it has the highest rate of concussions of any sport globally, making up 25% of all injuries. A recent study of the Premiership showed that if you played a full season of matches, you were more likely to have suffered a serious concussion than not. This video is brought to you by Manscaped, the very best in men's below-the-belt grooming. They're offering all viewers of this video 20% off their entire product range and free worldwide shipping with the code RugbyPod. That includes the Lawnmower 4.0 package. So go and use the code RugbyPod at checkout at manscaped.com. Trust us, your balls will thank you, and we can make more videos like this. After several well-known ex-players started suffering from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, a neurological disease linked primarily to repetitive head trauma, alarm bells started ringing. Its widespread nature across ex-players is startling and is what has triggered the recent revolution against the unions and playing bodies. World Rugby has recently hit back against the lawsuit, however, casting doubt on the number of players involved and criticising their use of the media to recruit more players into the action. They also claim that they've done their best to tackle the problem over the last few years. Alan Gilpin, the chief exec, states that he's made extensive efforts to reduce the number and severity of head impacts within the sport via law changes and education. However, Progressive Rugby, the lobby group, don't think Gilpin has gone anywhere near far enough with his changes, and so have recently submitted a list of requirements to World Rugby that they want to see implemented. But what changes have actually been made to improve the safety of the players in respect to concussions? Well, it's well known that high contact in the tackle area leads to the majority of concussions, and so that's been a priority to eradicate. They've done this by bringing in stricter red card rules and bans. But what about those who suffer concussions on field? How are they looked after? Well, historically, rugby's concussion assessments have been ineffective and, more worryingly, easily passable. The traditional 5-minute pitch-side suspected concussion assessment was criticised by ex-players, who argued that as concussed players, you can easily pass the assessment, and that concussion symptoms can often take 10 minutes or longer to present themselves, and hence, the 5-minute PCSA gave a licence for concussed players to return to the field. The other problem is that professional athletes are competitive beings and want to play on. In a study a couple of years ago, 75% of players who'd knowingly suffered a concussion carried on playing, with 78% admitting it was easy to pass these assessments. This process, luckily, has been vastly improved by the recent introduction of the HIA, which, due to improvements in technology, specialist tests, and a neutral matchday doctor, has got rid of some of the previous problems. World Rugby also recently announced another major change on concussion management, when they extended the compulsory stand-down period for affected players who'd suffered a concussion to 12 days. Previously, a pro player who failed an HIA was permitted to take the field again as early as the following weekend. The latest law change includes a provision, however, for players who fail an HIA but exhibit no on-pitch symptoms and have no history of concussions, which will allow them to return to the field within 7 days. Progressive Rugby argue that with this provision, there's no actual progress whatsoever, and hence World Rugby are knowingly putting players' lives at risk. In boxing, for example, a boxer has to have a 9-week stand-down period before they can fight again, and in 1977, rugby even proposed a 3-week stand-down period, which was never enforced. So how can it be the case that in 2022, a concussed player can take the field 7 days later? But why are World Rugby and the unions putting up such an aggressive fight and refusing to compensate the claimants? Well, the answer lies in what they've learned from the NFL. The NFL after rugby is the sport which suffers the most concussions. However, the NFL spent years trying to deny any link that emerged connecting playing American football, head injuries, and long-term brain disorders. Until 2009, when an NFL-funded study stated that former players are 19 times more likely than the general population to have dementia, Alzheimer's, or other memory-related diseases. These findings, amongst others, eventually led to the NFL's estimated $1 billion concussion-related lawsuit in 2016. The lawsuit against the NFL was brought on behalf of more than 5,000 retired players. The settlement calls for payments of up to $5 million each to former players diagnosed with certain neurological disorders, and to date it has already paid out millions in damages. Now, with rugby producing more concussions than the NFL, and with an ever-growing retired professional player body, you can see why World Rugby and the unions are reluctant to give in to the players' demands, because there's a high chance that if they did, it would bankrupt the sport and make the professional future of rugby untenable. It's not just the professional game being impacted, however. Junior and amateur rugby numbers have dwindled over the last couple of years due to the fears of amateur players suffering similar potential cognitive problems. However, is concussion actually the main issue here? Well, groundbreaking recent studies, such as those by Imperial College and the University of South Wales, have shown that the cognitive conditions ex-players are suffering from are not the results of concussions or their mistreatment, but of multiple rattlings of the brain. To date, the argument has focused almost exclusively around what has become known as concussion. However, it's not the concussions that are the main problem. They do play a part, as the outward manifestation of a distressed brain, but the damage to those brains is constant in a sport like rugby and correlates to the sheer number of blows each brain takes, directly or indirectly, over a prolonged period. The USW study explains that in rugby, you've got this recurrent contact that doesn't actually need to be anywhere near the head, so long as there's some sort of torsional movement imparted to the brain. So basically, the findings are that all physical contact in rugby leads to a certain amount of damage to the brain, even if it's not directly contacting the area. And with no way to control this with law changes, this spells trouble for the future of the sport. So rugby as a sport finds itself in a very fragile and unbeknown position. With every scientific study that comes out drawing parallels between brain damage and rugby, the sport excels closer to its death. However, where does the blame lie? Some ex-players claim they knew the risks they were signing up for, whilst others justifiably feel that brain damage is too heavy a price to pay for such a shortened professional career. World Rugby and the unions don't feel it's their responsibility to look after the claimants financially, and it appears that even law changes and medical innovation can't stop these problems from occurring in such an aggressive contact sport. Is this the end of rugby as we know it, or merely a false dawn?